In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. My grandparents' house in Overland Park was often one of the places our larger family gathered for holidays when I was growing up. On Christmas morning or Thanksgiving Day or whatever it might be, we would do our thing with my siblings and parents in Lawrence and then make the journey on K-10 eastward. I've shared it with all of you that my grandmother's cooking is one of my favorite things. So whenever we would hit the door of the house, you could always count on a loud greeting from an uncle, many cousins ready to run to the basement to play, and the smell of her delicious food in the air. According to my memory, which has varying degrees of reliability these days, my grandmother always had a small pot of sauerkraut on the stove, regardless of the holiday. Perhaps because of that strong smell, I never got brave enough to try it as a kid, even as I have learned to enjoy it today. I'm confident that if I smelled that same smell, even here and now, the memories would be so strong. It would be as though I was right in her kitchen once again. Scientific research has long affirmed the clear connection between scent and memory. The effect has come to earn its own name, the Proustian moment, a sensory experience that triggers a rush of memories often long past or even seemingly forgotten. You've experienced this, you know what I'm talking about. It's that scent of whatever that smell is at Bath & Body Works in the mall that makes you know you're right by it. Or popcorn, in our case yesterday, on the way to a movie. The name comes from a 1913 novel by a French writer named Marcel Proust, in which this moment is described. I carried to my lips a spoonful of the tea in which I had let soften a bit of Madeleine. But at the very instant when the mouthful of tea mixed with cake crumbs touched my palate, I quivered, attentive to the extraordinary thing that was happening inside me. I wondered what memories of your own life are tied to smells like this, from the mundane to the unique, the devastating to the joyful, or even the kind that you would rather not have to deal with again. The 12th chapter of John begins, as we just heard, with the story of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, three siblings who lived together in a town called Bethany, just a couple of miles outside of Jerusalem. That detail is significant as we near the story that would come to be known as Holy Week that begins next week. They are on the edges of Jerusalem, walking distance from the heart of that city, and as we will observe on Palm Sunday next Sunday, the location of Jesus' seeming triumphal entry as the final days of his life unfold. But let's not jump there too quickly. As we'll see, they're certainly in the background. These events are in the background of our story today, but before we look there, let's linger here for a bit longer. Actually, not here, but one chapter earlier. It was in the 11th chapter of John's Gospel, one chapter before our reading today, that Mary and Martha and Lazarus were at their home in Bethany. That time, instead of gathering for a dinner party, they were filled with anguish and despair. Lazarus was ill, and his sisters had sent for their friend Jesus. Jesus wasn't there, but he got word, and yet he stayed where he was for a couple of days. Eventually, Lazarus died and was placed in the tomb for several days before Jesus could get there. So once Jesus makes it to town, Martha approaches him with profound desperation in her voice. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." We can almost feel these words. "Lord, if you had been here," we may have found ourselves saying in our own lives. "Lord, if you had just been listening," or "Lord, if you hadn't been ignoring me." The story ends with Lazarus raised to new life that eventually leads to his presence at the dinner party we read about today. Before that moment, though, we hear Jesus going to the tomb where Lazarus had been laid for several days, and he says, "Take away the stone." To which Martha replies, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead for 4 days." The smell in the air, the smell that created her memory of those moments surrounding the death of her brother must have been strong enough for us to get the detail in what we have today. John included it for a reason. Now, we don't know how long precisely it was between that story and what we hear today, but it doesn't seem long. After all, the dinner party that they are attending is the moment of rejoicing in Lazarus' newfound life. That said, I imagine the smell stayed around a while, and if not, the memory that was created of their grief and sorrow and their desperation and anguish certainly did. Notice, though, what happens with this story as the story moves from death to life, as the story moves from desperation and terror and even feeling abandoned by God to a profound awareness of God's presence and to hope as the story we hear today unfolds. They were all at the table for dinner. Mary takes nard, an expensive, luxurious item, and pours it over Jesus' feet. Nard was an oil made from a plant native to the Himalayan mountains and is known to have a deep and rich smell. We are told the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. The stench and memory of death that had been filling that very house and even that very room was now filled with a smell and new story of the utter devotion of Mary that comes from death's defeat and the promised new life of her brother. Now, we can't act like this is some sort of perfect storybook ending as we hope for and as we have all been accustomed to crave. In the midst of these two stories, the leaders of the day continue to plot to kill Jesus. And not just Jesus, they also now want to kill Lazarus, lest he tell the story of his remarkable power of the one who would claim to be a new kind of king. Some argue this story is really the proverbial straw for the camel's back, as it is just after this that Jesus' passion, the story of his arrest and trial and death, begins. Now, there are at least two ways that this story resonates for me today. First is captured in a phrase. I don't know if I heard it. I'm sure I wasn't smart enough to make it up, but it goes something like, that I think about quite a bit, life and death and life. Or as we say it at a funeral in the Episcopal Church, even at the grave we make our song. This is the truth of our own experience of this life that is captured in these two moments. Just as the air was filled with the despair of Lazarus' death and the yearning for God to do something about it, to at least act as though God heard their cries, the air was then filled with new life as they realized God really hadn't left them at all. Life and death and life. We know that our lives are never entirely one or the other. We know that even when we think we finally have it all solved, when we feel as though all whom we love and even ourselves are well, things are finally in order as we have determined they should be, well, that's never really the case. And we know that even when we are overwhelmed with grief, or maybe just the daily chaos of life seems to be about 1 degree higher, inevitably goodness and grace appear. Beauty in brokenness, life in death and life. As people who follow Jesus, the promised hope and life of the resurrection doesn't actually absolve or resolve all of our problems here and now. It simply says that the story we see unfolding before us in our lives and in our world isn't the last word. It isn't how it will be. I wonder if the story of Lazarus and Mary and Martha and the air swirling around them isn't actually the best and truest example for us of how the promise that we know is waiting for us at Easter is experienced in our lives, while we expectantly wait for the coming promise of eternal rest. Of course, they haven't experienced the fullness of that promise yet, but into their sorrow and suffering comes Jesus and comes a life they never saw coming. They know that the worries and chaos, the anxieties and sorrows of their lives are also mixed in with hope and goodness and grace. And so we too are invited to know the very same thing, because the hope of the resurrection of Jesus isn't just some distant future hope, but one we know and experience and can embrace and discover even now. And this points me to the second way this story has resonated for me, which is all found in Mary. Just a note to say this isn't Mary Magdalene, nor any other Mary you might be thinking of. This is Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. Mary knows deep in her heart the truth of what I just said. She knows that life is a jumbled mix of all sorts of beauty and brokenness, but on a much deeper level, because of what Jesus has just done for her brother. She knows, indeed her very heart has been transformed by the truth that even the grave cannot contain Jesus. Mary's response is to give perhaps literally all that she has in a way that seems to be wasteful and careless. This oil would have cost 1 year's salary. It would have been a means to sustain her life, but she pours it out. and not just in some small amount, but so much so that she uses her hair to wipe it up, such that through her devotion she would become covered in the scent of life that now filled the air. You may know what's coming in the very next chapter of John's Gospel is that the final meal that Jesus has with his disciples when he gives them a new commandment to love one another. We now know this as Maundy Thursday. It's this new commandment to love one another that is best demonstrated in washing one another's feet, Jesus tells them. In some sense, Mary stands as a sort of forerunner to this. Even the Greek verb used in our story today for wiping her feet is only ever used again in John and that foot washing story soon to come. The power of the witness, as one writer puts it, the power of the witness of Mary's discipleship in this story is that she knows how to respond to Jesus without being told. She fulfills Jesus' love commandment before he even teaches it. Her response, her faithful response to Jesus' promise enacted in her life is a scandalous and reckless and intimate and extravagant devotion that is startling and even angering for those around her. And yet her heart is so changed, so moved, that this pouring out is the only response she can imagine. Life is in death, is in life. That much we know is true, for we have lived it. We feel it every day, and on many days that stench of death seems to be the only thing in the air. But today we are reminded that this isn't our only memory. This isn't our only story. In these late days of Lent, a new story is beginning to fill the air. Mary's example begins to point our way as we journey toward the swallowing up of death forever on Easter Day. You know that old phrase, don't just stand there, do something? I wonder if Mary might be saying us today, don't just do something, stand there. Stay there with Jesus. There's no doubt that the world and our lives feel full of injustice and despair and chaos in big ways and in small. I don't want to dismiss the need to respond, but I also don't want us to forget the one who sustains our lives, whose life shows us the way and whose life gives us life. And so in these last days of Lent, as we ready our hearts for Holy Week and Easter, we are called to draw near to Jesus, who is recklessly pouring out all that he has. Knowing that he has done this for us, we are called to do the same. We draw so near to him that we might even touch his feet. We draw so near to him that our very hearts and souls, our very bodies, our very lives are filled with the scent of life, that we might render it wherever we go. So don't just do something. Stand there. Stay there with Jesus. Draw nearer and nearer to him day by day until you and the world might come to see and smell again that death is defeated, life has found a way, and the light of hope will never be extinguished.